Regret is the only ghost that truly haunts a house. The father stood by the front door, his hands grasping the worn handle as though it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, like a man with 1,000 unspoken words trapped inside him. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passed by, children played in the yard across the street, and birds chirped without concern for the weight he carried. His eyes, however, remained fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something long lost but never found. It wasn't just the weathered face or the hunched shoulders that told the story of a life full of sacrifice, but the way his presence seemed to hold a silent plea, a plea that his son would somehow understand what he had given up. The father never spoke of it. Silence was his language, a language he had perfected over years of toil, of never-ending work that had kept him away from the people who mattered most. He thought back to the days when he was young, the days when ambition was fresh, and the world seemed to promise so much. He was once a man with dreams, with desires that reached beyond the confines of his small town. But life, as it does, demanded more. The late nights, the hours spent away from his family, the promises made and broken with each passing year. There was no room for dreams, no time for anything other than the work that kept food on the table. It was a silent sacrifice, one that no one ever saw. The son, too, had his own life, one filled with ambition, success, and the hollow victories that came with them. But in his father's eyes, he saw none of the pride he expected to find. Instead, there was only a quiet longing, the kind of longing that whispered of regret. 1,000 moments had passed, moments where he could have reached out, moments where the silence could have been broken. But he didn't. And now, as his father's health began to fail, the weight of those missed opportunities pressed down on him, a pressure he couldn't escape. His chest tightened as he remembered the last conversation he had with his father. There was no argument, no harsh words, just an awkward silence, filled with the unspoken things they both wished they could say. He had brushed it off, convinced that the time would come for them to talk. But now, staring at the frail figure before him, he realized the time had long passed. The truth came crashing down on him. He had ignored the man who had given everything for him, and in doing so, he had lost something precious. The father had never been angry, never resentful. He had simply become a ghost in his own house, haunting its empty rooms with the weight of 1,000 silent sacrifices. The son's breath caught in his throat as he realized the depth of his father's love, the love that had never needed to be spoken aloud, the love that had always been there, waiting, silently, for him to notice. And in that moment, as the realization hit him, he felt his own walls crumble. There was no grand revelation, no epiphany, just the simple, painful truth that sometimes, it's too late to fix the things we wish we could. And yet, in that silence, he finally understood. The father's love, though quiet and unspoken, had always been there. And maybe that was enough. The son stood by the doorway, his hands trembling as he reached for the worn photograph his father had kept hidden away. The image was faded, the edges curled from years of neglect, but it still held the remnants of a life that was once full of hope. In it, the father was young, full of ambition, his smile wide and unburdened by the years that would later weigh him down. The son's eyes traced the lines of his father's face, now etched deep with the passage of time. He had always seen his father as a pillar, steady and unwavering. But now, in this quiet moment, he saw him as a man who had sacrificed everything, even the chance to live for himself. The weight of those sacrifices hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The son's chest tightened, the realization settling in like a heavy stone. For years, he had been too absorbed in his own life, in his own pursuits, to notice the toll it had taken on his father. He had never truly seen the cost of the silence that filled their home. The father's quiet strength, once admired, now seemed like a mask that hid a deep well of unspoken pain. The son's thoughts drifted to the countless nights his father had spent alone, to the long hours he had worked, to the promises he had made and broken, all in the name of providing. There had been no time for dreams, no time for connection. The son felt a pang of guilt, sharp and sudden, as he realized how little he had understood. His father had never asked for anything, never demanded more than what he had already given. But now, standing here, The son wished he could give back just a fraction of the love his father had silently offered. He turned away from the photograph, unable to bear the weight of the memories it held. His mind raced, the years of missed moments flashing before his eyes. Every conversation left unfinished, every glance ignored, every hug that never came. It all added up to this moment, to this painful recognition of what had been lost. He had lived his life thinking he had all the time in the world to make things right. But now, standing in front of his father's frailty, he knew that time was running out. The silence that had once been a comfort, a way to avoid confrontation, now felt like a wall that separated them. He reached out a hand, hesitated, and then withdrew it, the distance between them suddenly too great to bridge. He could hear the quiet ticking of the clock in the background, the steady passage of time that never stopped, never waited. The son's heart ached as he realized that the things he had taken for granted were slipping away, irretrievably. The weight of his father's love, though unspoken, was now clearer than ever. It was a love built on sacrifice, a love that had never asked for anything in return. And in that silence, the son found himself caught between regret and the painful acceptance that it might be too late to undo the damage. The son sat beside his father's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall, marking each second like a reminder of what had passed. He had been here for hours, the weight of the silence between them hanging heavier with each passing minute. His father, once so strong, now lay frail and vulnerable, the years of hard work and silent sacrifice etched into his face. The son had always known his father was aging, but he had never truly understood the depth of it, the quiet toll that time had taken on him. He thought of all the years he had spent pursuing his own life, his own career, his own success. He had been so absorbed in his world, so certain that his father would always be there, waiting for him to finally show up, to finally pay attention. But now, with the reality of his father's fragility staring him in the face, the son felt the sting of regret. The unspoken words that had filled the years between them now felt like a chasm too wide to cross. He thought back to all the times he had taken his father's presence for granted, all the moments he had brushed off with a casual excuse or a hurried goodbye. The moments that could have been spent together, that could have been filled with laughter or even silence, but instead had been swallowed up by his own self-absorption. He reached out, his hand hovering over his father's, but he stopped himself. His father had never needed words, never asked for anything. The quiet sacrifice had been enough. The son's hand trembled slightly as he withdrew it, his heart aching with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. The past seemed to stretch out before him, filled with missed opportunities, with chances to connect that had slipped through his fingers like sand. And yet, here he was, still searching for a way to make things right. He looked at his father, the man who had given everything without asking for anything in return. The silence between them had always been their language, the quiet bond that held them together even when words failed. But now, as the father's breath grew shallower, the son felt the gravity of the years of silence. It was as though the walls that had once protected them from the pain of confrontation were now closing in, suffocating them both. The son's chest tightened with a raw, unspoken pain. The realization hit him like a wave, crashing over him with all the force of a truth he had been too afraid to face. The father he had always seen as invincible, as the one who had carried the weight of their world, was now so small, so fragile, and there was nothing he could do to change the past. There were no more chances to undo the mistakes, no more moments to relive. The son bowed his head, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. He had taken so much for granted, had been too focused on his own ambitions to see what had been right in front of him. Now, all he could do was sit in the quiet, watching his father, and waiting for the inevitable. The realization settled deep in his bones, a hard truth he couldn't escape. The silence between them had been both their greatest strength and their deepest regret. The son sat in the chair beside his father's bed, the room quiet except for the soft sound of his father's breathing. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching out, becoming heavier than the last. His father's frail hand rested on the blanket, unmoving. The son had spent the last few days in the sterile, cold quiet of the hospital, trying to find the right words, but they never came. The silence between them had become a painful reminder of everything they had never said. He had come to realize that this silence was not just a byproduct of his father's stoicism, but a shield against a deeper pain, one that had been carried for years without anyone acknowledging it. The weight of all those years of silent sacrifices, those missed moments of connection, pressed down on him like a physical force. He thought of the times his father had stayed up late working, his tired eyes the only sign of how much he had given. He thought of the sacrifices his father had made, the things he had left behind, not for himself, but for his family. The son felt a deep ache, a sense of loss for what had never been. He had never asked his father about his past, about the things that had shaped him into the man he had become. He had always assumed his father's silence was a choice, a personal decision to withdraw from the world. But now, in the quiet of the room, he understood. The silence was a shield, one that had been put in place to protect him from the pain of what had been lost. It was only now, in this moment of stillness, that the son could see the depth of his father's sacrifice. It wasn't just the long hours spent at work, the absence from family events, the physical toll on his body. It was the emotional toll that no one had ever acknowledged. The father had always carried the weight of their family on his shoulders, never complaining, never asking for recognition. But now, as the son looked at him, he saw the years of hurt that had been hidden beneath that stoic mask. His father had given everything, and the son had never fully understood the price that had been paid. The son's chest tightened with the weight of regret. He had been so wrapped up in his own life, in his own success, that he had failed to see what was right in front of him. He had taken his father's presence for granted, assuming he would always be there. But now, as he watched his father slip away, he realized that time was running out. There would be no more chances to make things right, no more opportunities to share the things they had never said. The son's heart ached with the realization that he had spent so much of his life focused on the wrong things. He had been searching for success, for achievements, for the approval of others, but he had never stopped to consider what really mattered. Now, sitting in this quiet room, with his father's fading breath the only sound, the son understood. The love his father had shown him was never in grand gestures, never in words. It was in the small things, the quiet presence, the steady support, the unspoken sacrifices that had been made every day, without ever asking for anything in return. And now, as the son sat in the quiet, he knew that all he could do was accept what had been. The regret was there, but it wasn't enough to undo the years of silence. It was only in this moment, this painful realization, that the son understood the depth of the love his father had always given him. The silence between them, once a barrier, had now become the truest expression of the love they had never spoken aloud. The room felt colder now, the silence stretching out, too heavy to bear. The son had been sitting beside his father's bed for hours, each minute passing with the weight of everything unsaid. He had spent so much of his life chasing after success, after achievements that seemed so important at the time. But now, in the quiet of this room, he realized how little those things truly mattered. He looked at his father, who lay so still, so fragile, a man who had given everything to raise him, yet had never once asked for recognition, for a pat on the back. His father had never wanted the spotlight. He had never needed applause or thanks. His love had been a quiet, unspoken thing, and the son had only now come to understand the true depth of it. All those years, he had missed it. He had missed the subtle ways his father had shown care, in the way he would silently take on more responsibility, in the way he would go without, so the son could have what he needed. There had been no grand gestures, no elaborate speeches. There had been only the slow, steady rhythm of sacrifice, day in and day out, and the son had never once stopped to consider how much it had cost. The truth hit him with a sharpness that left him breathless. His father had been carrying this burden alone for so long, never once letting it show. The son had always thought of his father as invincible, as someone who could never be broken, but now he saw the cracks in that image. He saw the toll that years of quiet sacrifice had taken. The son's chest tightened, a dull ache spreading across his body. He had been blind, selfish even, in his pursuit of a life that he thought would bring him fulfillment. He had never taken the time to truly be present with his father, to listen to the silent stories woven into the fabric of their lives. Now, as his father's breath became shallow, the son realized the full weight of his own neglect. He thought of all the times he had brushed off his father's calls, the times he had hurried through visits, thinking there would always be another chance to make things right. But now, there was no more time. His father was slipping away, and all the son could do was sit there, feeling the sting of every moment he had wasted. He could never get those moments back. The grief was suffocating. The guilt was unbearable. But in the quiet, amidst the pain, something else began to stir. The son reached out, his hand trembling as it hovered over his father's. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Instead, he simply held his father's hand, letting the silence between them speak the words that had never been spoken aloud. The weight of the years, the weight of the sacrifice, was finally acknowledged, not through grand gestures or apologies, but through the simple act of being there, in this moment, together. It was not a resolution, not a grand closure, but it was enough. The son closed his eyes, letting the quiet wash over him, and for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to love without expectation. To love not with words, but with actions, with sacrifice, with silence. And in that understanding, there was a fragile, tentative peace. The son sat in the dimly lit room, his gaze fixed on his father's fragile figure, the stillness of the space pressing down on him like a weight he could not escape. The soft beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound, steady and unrelenting, a reminder of the passing time, of the moments slipping away. His father's breath was shallow now, each one slower than the last, and the son felt as though the very air around him was thick with the years of unspoken regrets that had been building up between them. He had thought, in his youth, that time was something infinite, something he could control, that there would always be another chance to mend the things left undone. But now, sitting here, he realized how fragile time really was. He had wasted so much of it, wrapped up in his own world, consumed by the need for success, for approval, for validation. The moments that could have been spent with his father, those fleeting opportunities to bridge the gap between them, had all been lost. The silence that once seemed comfortable now felt like a suffocating barrier. The son could feel the weight of his father's sacrifice, the invisible burden that had been carried for years without ever being acknowledged. It was not just the long hours spent working, the physical toll on his body, or the countless nights spent alone. It was the emotional cost of being the strong one, the one who had to carry the family, who had to provide, who had to be there even when his own heart was breaking. The son's chest tightened as he thought back to the moments of silence between them. How many times had he brushed off his father's attempts at conversation, thinking he was too busy? How many times had he taken his father's quiet strength for granted? It hit him now, with a force that left him breathless, that his father had never been just a figure in the background. He had been the foundation, the quiet force that had held everything together, and yet, in all the years they had spent together, the son had never truly seen that. The regret was overwhelming. The son's hand hovered over his father's, trembling as he reached out, unsure if his touch would be enough to bridge the distance between them. His father's fingers, once so strong, were now thin and frail, the skin paper thin, the veins visible beneath. It was a stark reminder of how much time had passed, of the years that could never be regained. As he held his father's hand, the son's heart ached with a sorrow he could not put into words. There was so much he wished he could say, so much he wished he had said. But now, with the weight of his own failures pressing down on him, all he could do was sit in the quiet, feeling the depth of his regret. The silence between them no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a presence, a weight they had both carried for far too long. And in that moment, the son understood. It wasn't just about the things left unsaid. It was about the things that could never be said, the moments lost in the rush of life, the love that had always been there, but had never been fully realized. And as the father's breath grew slower, more labored, the son felt a deep sense of surrender. There would be no grand resolution, no dramatic reconciliation. But in this quiet room, in the soft grip of his father's hand, there was a peace. A peace that came not from fixing the past, but from finally accepting it. A peace that came from understanding that some things were beyond words, beyond actions. That sometimes, the greatest love was found in the silence, in the quiet moments of presence. And as the father's breath faltered one last time, the son closed his eyes, letting go of the weight of regret, knowing that he had finally understood the true meaning of sacrifice and love. The son sat motionless, his eyes locked onto his father's face, the quiet room filled only with the sound of a distant wind rustling through the trees outside. The moments stretched endlessly, as if time itself had paused, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. His father's frail form, now almost ghostly in the dim light, seemed to have softened in the past few days, the weight of a lifetime of quiet sacrifice visible in every inch of him. The son's hand hovered over his father's, trembling ever so slightly. For the first time, he realized that the silence they had shared for years had not been a wall, but a bond, a thread that connected them in ways that words never could. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, only the slow, steady rhythm of life passing them by. But in this stillness, the son understood that the true meaning of their relationship had never been in the words left unspoken, but in the way they had both carried the unspoken weight together. He could feel the years of unacknowledged love, the years of missed chances, but there was no more time for regret. There was only the present, only the quiet truth of what had always been. The father had never demanded anything. He had never asked for anything. And now, as his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, the son realized that all he could do was sit with him, be present, and let the weight of the years fall away. It was a strange, almost surreal peace that washed over him, a peace that came not from fixing anything, but from the simple act of being here, of accepting what had been and what could never be changed. His father's eyes were closed now, the lines of age deepening, but there was a softness there, a sense of release. And in that softness, the son found something unexpected, forgiveness, not just for his father, but for himself. The bitterness, the regret, the sense of failure that had been gnawing at him for so long began to loosen its grip. It was as if, in this moment, all the mistakes they had made, all the things left unsaid, had faded into the background. The years of distance, of silence, of hurt, were still there, but they no longer felt as heavy. For the first time, the son could breathe without the crushing weight of guilt, without the constant ache of what could have been. He looked at his father one last time, seeing not the man who had been absent from his life, but the man who had always been there, quietly, in the background, holding everything together. The realization was simple but profound. His father had never left. He had always been right there, in the moments between the words, in the silence that had spoken louder than any words ever could. And as the father's breathing slowed, the son finally let go of the weight of regret, surrendering to the quiet understanding that there was no need to fix anything anymore. There was only peace in the acceptance of what was, and in that peace, the son felt a sense of release, a sense of freedom that he had never known before. The son stood at the window, his hands pressed against the cool glass, staring out at the world that continued to move, unaware of the moment he was living through. The soft glow of the morning sun bathed the yard in a warm light, but it felt distant, as if it belonged to another world, one that no longer had a place for the ache he felt inside. He had spent so many years running, chasing after things that, in the end, meant so little. The weight of those years hung heavy on his shoulders now, but as he stood there, his father's presence still lingering in the room behind him, something shifted within him. The peace that had settled over him, fragile yet undeniable, was not something he had expected to find, and yet here it was, a quiet, unspoken truth that filled the space between them. His father's passing, though a devastating loss, had somehow brought him closer to something he had never truly understood, the love that had been quietly given, without need for recognition, without expectation. The love that had been there all along, in the small, silent moments that had never been fully acknowledged. His father had never been one for words. He had never asked for much. And yet, in his own way, he had given everything, more than he had ever been asked to give. And now, standing here, the son felt the weight of that gift, not as a burden, but as something sacred, something to hold with gratitude rather than regret. He turned back toward his father's bed, where his father had once lain, his chest still rising and falling in quiet, labored breaths. The absence was profound, but it wasn't an absence of just the body. It was an absence of the years that could never be recovered, the years that had been lost to silence, to distance. And yet, in that silence, the son found a strange sense of clarity. He understood now that there was no way to undo the past, no way to erase the years that had been filled with missed opportunities, with words left unsaid, with love unacknowledged. But there was peace in accepting it all, in recognizing that life, with all its imperfections, had still been full of meaning. He no longer felt the crushing weight of regret. Instead, there was room for something else. Acceptance, a quiet forgiveness that had never been possible before. He reached down and touched the small object on the nightstand, his fingers brushing over it as if for the first time. It was an old, worn watch, one his father had worn for as long as he could remember. It had always been there, ticking quietly in the background, marking the passing of time in a way that seemed so insignificant in the moment, but had now become a symbol of everything that had come before. The son held the watch in his hand, turning it over slowly, feeling the cool metal against his palm. The years were there, in the scratches and the wear, but they were also there in the quiet, steady rhythm of the ticking, a reminder that even the smallest moments had their place in the grand scheme of things. He understood now that the moments they had shared, the silence they had lived in, had been part of something much bigger, something that could never be fully understood until this very moment. He let out a long breath, finally feeling the weight of the years lift from his chest. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to say, only the quiet truth of what had always been, and the peace that came with accepting it. With the watch still in his hand, he walked over to the window, gazing out at the world that was still turning, knowing that he would never be the same again. The lessons had been learned, not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of understanding that came too late. And as he stood there, the world outside unchanged, he knew that his father had left him with something far more valuable than any words could have ever given. He had left him with the gift of knowing, of understanding, and of finally being able to let go. The son stood alone in the house now, the room still and quiet, filled with an absence that was both overwhelming and strangely comforting. The weight of the past was no longer a burden he could not bear. It was there, yes, in the memories, in the years of missed moments, but it no longer felt like something that could break him. His father had taught him, in the most subtle way, that love did not always need to be spoken. It could be found in the quiet acts of sacrifice, in the long hours of silence where nothing needed to be said. As he walked through the house, his hand brushing over the familiar objects that had been part of his life for so long, he realized that each one held a piece of his father, a memory of a man who had given everything without asking for anything in return. The old leather chair in the corner, the stack of books on the coffee table, the worn kitchen counter. It all felt like a part of him, even though his father was no longer here to fill the spaces. The son could still feel him, though, in the way the house felt different now, in the way his own breath seemed to slow as if in recognition of the stillness that had settled around him. He could not undo the past. He could not change the years they had spent apart, the things they had left unsaid. But what he could do was remember, and in that remembering, he found peace. The regret that had haunted him for so long began to dissolve, not because he had fixed anything, but because he had finally accepted it. He had come to terms with the reality that some things could never be changed, that time, once lost, could never be regained. But there was something else now, something deeper. There was a sense of gratitude, of understanding that the love he had always sought, the approval he had always craved, had been there all along. It had never left him. It had never been about grand gestures or spoken words. It had always been in the quiet presence, in the way his father had stood by him, never asking for anything in return. The sun walked outside now, the air crisp and cool, the world around him moving as it always had. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer felt the need to chase after something that had always been with him. The weight of his father's love, the sacrifices made, had become something he could carry with him, not as a burden, but as a part of who he was. And as he looked up at the sky, the sun beginning to set in the distance, the son finally understood that he had been given something far more valuable than he had ever realized. His father had left him with a legacy, not of success or achievement, but of love, of quiet strength, and of the power of acceptance. He didn't need to fix anything. He didn't need to change the past. All he needed to do was move forward, carrying with him the lessons of the past, the love that had always been there, and the peace that had finally come with acceptance.